Devan looked out the window of the school bus, a heavy sigh escaping him as he thought, with a heavy heart, of things which he did not want to think about. Modestly, he scooted over to allow a girl he knew, or rather knew of, sit next to him. She was a pretty blonde. Devan didn't say anything to her. He merely continued to stare out of the window. It was a sunny day, fortunately. Devan enjoyed sunny days as much as he could. After all, who didn't? And when the school bus arrived, he was happy to leave it. On the slow walk into his high school, Northlamp, he took the time to soak in as much of it as he could while still leaving himself enough time to make it to class. After all, he was a smart kid. The school's grounds were fairly sizable, though perhaps not largest of the counties nearest Devan's own, the county of Greenfield in Lightsburg, New York. No, not the city of New York, but a few dozen miles away from it, yes, or at least the outskirts of it. It was a bustling place, really. Lightsburg, not the city, though you'd be correct either way. The people were similar, though decidedly the people of Lightsburg were politer. Perhaps, however, not as kind, or so Devan often thought to himself. Maybe it was all the money they had here, which he was grateful for, of course, but he didn't fit into it well. Maybe he fit better in the city. But it was difficult to live there, and he'd only just turned 18. It would be better if he stayed, and, of course, his parents both wanted that. A sigh escaped Devan as the bell to homeroom rang clear. Despite thinking he'd given himself enough time, he was late, once again. This was probably going to be the last time his teacher would deal with it. He would find out. He walked into class half-cocked, kind of angry, but at himself rather than anybody else. The teacher noticed. "Devan," she said, somewhat annoyingly, "why are you late?" She was a tall woman who often wore heels, had red hair, was late 30s, and yes, Devan did find her attractive, but her personality made him kind of despise her. Devan shrugged. "Sorry, I thought I had more time than I did." She said matter-of-factly. "You know, if it happens again, I'll have to write you up for tardiness." "I know," said Devan, who had forgotten also that he had one last tardy left, now used up. He often overestimated or underestimated situations, however. It was kind of a bad habit of his, one of the reasons why thought he felt so. "In fact," said Miss Humphrey, that was her name, "why don't you come to my office after school and spend a detention there? Say, today." Devan sighed, stuffing his hands in his pocket and lowering his head to look at the ground. "Okay." "What was that?" she commanded. "Yes, Miss Humphrey," he corrected himself. "Good," she said, "and tuck in your undershirt. It makes your uniform look raggedy." In truth, it was just Devan who looked raggedy and not the uniform, but he kept his mouth shut, as Miss Humphrey wouldn't probably take any kind of back talk, and took a seat in his assigned seat. The day passed by per usual, and nothing interesting happened, as usual, once again. Devan had a test in his math class, which he knew he'd aced. It was easy enough for him, though the other students seemed to struggle and groan about it. He didn't mind, he just kept to himself, did his work. He didn't have many friends. In fact, he had virtually none, save a few friendly faces, who would say hi to him here and there throughout the day. At lunch, sometimes he sat in a group, though he didn't say much. Most of the kids in that group only let him sit with them because they felt bad for him, and Devan, who wished he could be more entertaining at least, or interesting, sat mostly in silence, listening and occasionally laughing at the jokes that his friends made, but for the most part, he was alone. In truth, he didn't mind it that much, at least compared to how much he figured most people would be bothered by it, the loneliness. And in fact, he wouldn't normally characterize it as loneliness, but rather solitude, mostly. Sometimes he did feel lonely, though, and his disposition was often a sad one, but he blamed himself mostly for that. And he didn't think it was anyone's fault. It was kind of just how he was. Perhaps there were other contributing factors. After school, when Devan arrived in Miss Humphrey's classroom for his detention, though it wasn't an official detention, nonetheless they could detain him, the teachers, whenever they wanted to, he found Miss Humphrey leaning back in her chair, heels rested on the desk. As he entered, she stood up and immediately instructed him. "You will sit here," she said, pointing at a desk in the corner, which she had apparently arranged so that he was facing the corner, as if he were a child in time out or something. Ungrudgingly, he made his way towards the desk, only to discover on his way that across the room in the other corner there sat someone else, someone he'd never seen before. She was small, with light brown hair, and she stared unwaveringly at the wall in front of her, just as Devan was expected to do. Though by the time he got to that point, he was having an admittedly difficult time doing so. He wanted to look at her, to see who she was, and of course, because she was quite pretty to him. Miss Humphrey would surely notice if he looked, wouldn't she? Devon darted his eyes from the wall over towards where the girl sat next to him, but he couldn't see without turning his head. Fuck it. He turned his head to look at her. Immediately, Mr. Troop, came her near shrieking voice. What did I tell you? Sorry, Miss Humphrey. Devon lowered his head and looked back to the wall. Don't let me catch you doing that again, she said. You're not here to gaze. I'm gazing at the wall, Devon managed under his breath. What was that? Miss Humphrey asked, a little too softly. Nothing, Devon said, straightening his head and staring intently at the wall. Good, she said. Now continue to look at that wall for the rest of your detention in my classroom, or you'll have more detentions here. Begrudgingly, now Devon listened. It was not long, about 10 or 15 minutes, before Devon found himself nodding off, bored of his current situation. Obviously. Unfortunately, if Miss Humphrey caught him doing this as well, there would surely be hell to pay. He tried to wake himself up by blinking, the only thing he thought he could do to stay awake. So comically, sitting in the corner of Miss Humphrey's classroom, he blinked rapidly, nearly laughing at himself. How ridiculous was this? He was sitting in a corner next to a pretty girl who he desperately wanted to talk to, and he didn't even have the courage to look over, ignore Miss Humphrey, and say hi, and he was blinking like a maniac. So he looked over. The girl looked back. Hey, Devon said, smoother than he expected. She smiled. And with that, Miss Humphrey began to yell, What did I say? Devon quickly looked back at the wall, and fortunately that was the end of it, or so he thought. When detention had finished, and it was time for Devon and whoever she was to leave and to go home, Miss Humphrey stopped the two of them and said, as if she were happy about it, The two of you will have detention here every Friday from now on until the end of the month. Devon didn't react physically, but apologized. Sorry, Miss Humphrey. He put his head down slightly. Whoever she was mimicked him. 3 more weeks, Miss Humphrey clarified, standing sternly as if she needed to. Devon nodded and looked at the girl. She looked scared, if he were being honest. Come on. They walked together outside of the school. They were going the same way, it turned out. And her name was Casey. She was 18 as well, and from a small town not far from Lightsburg called Littleton. Devon had never heard of it before, but he shrugged it off and kept talking to her. In fact, he found that he was talking quite a bit. Not a usual thing for him to do, actually. Strangely enough, he seemed keen to listen, even smiling here and there, though she spoke sparsely and seemed to prefer to let Devon speak. When they arrived to Devon's house, it was first on the way. Devon stopped and looked at Casey, who stood there holding one of her arms. She looked so innocent to him that he almost felt bad for her, though he had no reason to. They stood a moment to look at one another in the cold. After all, it was spring, and the sunny day had been replaced by rain, only sprinkling, but still, even with their jackets on, they could feel the chill of it. Do you want to come in? Devon asked. She looked away a moment and then looked up to him and said, Okay. Here, said Devon, we can go in through the basement door on the side. That's where we're headed anyway. Devon went towards the basement entrance, a small brown wooden door that was placed flimsily on 3 hinges and its meager door frame. Casey followed. Immediately as they entered, their moods brightened, and the room, filled with video games, board games, and the like, did nothing if not lift their spirits and give them the opportunity to have some fun. Devon sat down. Grab that one, he said. Which what? Asked Casey, kind of clueless as to which game he meant. There were so many of them. That one, he pointed at a game for the newest console, the G500. It was called Only in Daylight. Casey grabbed it and plopped down next to him, looking down at the game and then back up to him. What is it? It's a horror game, Devon said, taking it from her and looking it over. One of your favorites, she asked, smiling. Yeah, Devon sighed, taking another look at it. Let's play it. She nodded without moving. Okay. In a moment, Devon had the game inserted into the G500. He handed Casey a controller, and they began. The objective of the game was an odd one. One had to find a key, a magic key that supposedly could unlock any door, chest, or well, lock in the game. Once you had it, you could escape the house you were trapped in. There was only one catch. You were trapped inside with your mother, and she had turned into an evil demon of some sort. Needless to say, when you ran into her, it was quite scary, and you couldn't harm her in any way, so you had to run to safety and wait for her to pass. Casey, surprisingly, was all about it. She jumped into the game head-on, getting past the first few checkpoints with ease. Eventually, however, she needed Devon's help. Now, Devon knew the game, the hiding spots, the objectives, all the ins and outs of it, so he was of good use to Casey when she got stuck, and he directed her when she wanted to try herself. Devan quite liked that, and so did Casey, if truth be told, and they wouldn't reach the end of the game by today, but again, if truth be told, Devan didn't want to. He wanted another excuse for Casey to come over and to hang out with him again. In fact, he asked her if that would be alright, say next Friday, and she said yes. As she left, closing the door behind her, Devan got a warm feeling inside, and he couldn't help but to think that he'd somehow lucked out meeting this girl. For the first time in a long time, he had something to look forward to, and at school the next day nonetheless. He waved as she said goodbye.